of St. John, beginning at the 32nd verse. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" He said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there's a stench, because he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him, let him go." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. During the week, I got a call that surprised me a great deal. The voice was from somebody in another Lutheran church in the area. And he said, "Pastor, are you celebrating All Saints' Day this coming Sunday?" What surprised me was that anybody knew that it was one of the major church holidays, a day of celebration. How did he know that? Because we so seldom celebrate All Saints' Day. I said, "Yes, we are celebrating All Saints' Day." And then he said, "Well, are you going to remember?" And then he said the person's name, and it was somebody that had died within the past year. And all of a sudden, I understood what he was trying to get at. And I said, "Well, now when I said we're celebrating it, we don't have a stash of candles where you take a candle and light it and say a special prayer for every individual saint that the church wants to celebrate. But we are going to celebrate All Saints' Day." And he said, "Well, thank you." So this is All Saints' Day. We have it every year, but we very seldom talk about it. But I think we need to talk about it because it is a very influential day. Today is All Saints' Day. It's not practiced a lot in the Lutheran Church. It is a major celebration in the Catholic, Episcopal, and Orthodox churches. And it is that day when they celebrate those people that have gone before, that have been instrumental in preserving the faith. The Catholic Church started it, and they started having special days for saints. And after a while, there got to be more days or more saints than there were Sundays, so they started having every day be a possible saint's day. And of course, after a few years, this started in the 14th century, we grew beyond 365 days, and they just said, "Well, we'll stack up on the days, individual days, but we'll have one day when we celebrate all the saints, all those who have gone before, who have lived and died for the faith. And so it's passed on to us. And it's a day that we remember with sadness, because it makes us think of the death of those that have gone before, and some of those are very, very close to us. Most of us, somebody that they mourn today the loss of. But it is also the day of celebration, because it's a call that the saints now still live. They live in eternity with Christ. It is also a day of celebration. Most of us don't like to talk about death, especially our own. The humorist Woody Allen used to include this in his little humor things. He said, "They say that I will live forever on the silver screen, but I'd rather live forever in my apartment." He says, as a matter of fact, I don't want to see immortality by my work. I want to see it by not dying. I think that's where most of us are, really. But in contrast to that, Philip Yancey, in his book, The Jesus I Never Met, talks about a Christian group in Africa that never talks about death in the negative. As a matter of fact, they very seldom use the equivalent word for death. They will say, my wife or my husband, my child has gone home. Gone home. They wouldn't even think of saying, I lost my husband last July 14th. They would say, my husband went home on July 14th. And this is sort of the message of All Saints' Day. But to make it more practical, it is a call to honor saints, but it is also a call to be a saint. That's the meaning of All Saints' Day. So where does our gospel lesson come into that? Well, it's a familiar story. Jesus was a friend of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And Jesus is preaching in a village about 2 miles away from where this family lived, and he visited them often. And the word comes to him that Lazarus is very sick, and they ask him if he'll come and lay his hands on him, give him a blessing. And Jesus, remarkably enough, says, I'll be there. But he waits a couple extra days. And during that time, Lazarus dies. I understand that one. I had a very close friend. And I lived in Hawaii who was dying. And she called and asked, can you come and see me before I die? And I said, I'll be there. I asked the caretaker, how long does she have to live? And they said, well, she could go any time, but probably another week, 10 days. I waited 2 days, just like Jesus. I got a call from her daughter that she had passed away. It is days that I regret. But Jesus' pause was not the same. He had a lesson in mind. And when he came to see Mary and Martha, they were upset. They said, well, why didn't you come sooner? If you'd have come sooner, he wouldn't have died. One after the other. Justifiably so, you would say. But Jesus there wanted to talk about the fact that people who belong to his kingdom never die. And so he had this miraculous healing where he called and said, Lazarus, come out. He didn't promise him he'd live forever in immortality. But he understood that you never really die if you die in relationship to Jesus Christ. There's also one thing that is noteworthy in this particular reading from the Gospel of John. It's the shortest verse in all the Bible. And in most translations it said Jesus wept. We used to use it as kind of a humor thing at the seminary because we, during our meeting with the three professors before we graduated, we were supposed to bring our favorite Bible verse. And a lot of people would come and say, well, John 10:35, Jesus wept. Just one that they could remember. But this is a very powerful Bible verse of 2 words. It communicates to us that Jesus weeps for us. He weeps for us in our tragedies, in our deaths, in our grieving. He is there. And he says it's all right to weep because there is a separation. But, as 1 Thessalonians says, you weep not as one who has no hope, but one who has the assurance of the resurrection. We are called to honor saints, all those that have gone before us. And in a lot of Lutheran churches, and I don't know if we should do it here, it's a little dangerous when you have an all-wooden building, but they have banks of candles. And on All Saints' Day, members of the congregation at one particular point in the service come and they'll light a candle and say a prayer for some dear departed loved one. It's a moving service. You might talk about it. Talk to the council about it. But we are also called to be saints. And so this morning, not only are you called to honor saints, but you are called to be one. And this means you need a definition. Because I think when most of you talk about saints, you talk about somebody who is, what you see, super religious, who's always at church, always doing things for the church, always doing something to help other people, someone who knows how to pray well, someone who is always at communion, confessing, trying to make things better. We look at somebody like Mother Teresa, and we say, well, we understand her being a saint, but we can't really understand ourselves being a saint. And yet, I bet you every one of you has used the word saint in a conversation about somebody else somewhere along the line. You said, oh, she's such a saint. I mean, she's got kind of an abusive husband. And she is so saintly, she just bears the thing up. Or he is such a saint. He always is there at the front door to welcome new people into the church. I said last week, my admitting nurse before surgery was a saint. She made everything well at a time when I was very confused and a little bit scared. And I said, God put you here. You are a saint. And so we have in our mind this idea of saint, even though when we start to verbalize it, we blow it out of proportion. A saint is somebody who is admired, who deserves our gratitude because they stood up and did something for us in a very precious moment in our lives. Each one of us, I think, can name a saint. Somebody who was instrumental in our lives, somebody we respect, somebody who was always there, somebody who cared about us. And I'm going to do this today. It's going to be a little audience participation during the closing or for the general prayer of the church. We're going to talk about or have a prayer for the saints. And I'm going to mention my brother who died this past year. I'm going to start with Lillejord, and then I'll ask each one of you in the congregation to say the name of somebody who was a saint to you. So you understand saints are real. I can remember to my dad, Aunt Anna was a saint. He didn't like the rest of her sisters. He had bad names for all of them, bad on my dad's part, and we scolded him a lot for that. But Aunt Anna, he loved. He would stop on the way out to our farm from where we lived, and he'd always come there and have a cup of coffee every day. It didn't matter when he got out there, he'd always stop. Didn't have to announce it because she was always there welcoming. And the one thing you remember about Aunt Anna was she always gave you only half a cup of coffee. And you wonder, what's going on? Why is she only giving you half a cup of coffee? Because you go back and ask her for more. She thought you'd drunk it. Finally, we find out that she had her bifocals. She thought, we said, why is only this cup of coffee half full? She just looked full of me. She was looking through her bifocals and she thought it was full. But it didn't matter because her heart was full. And we all thought she was a saint. Sainthood isn't that hard. It's being kind. It's saying nice things. It's restricting ourselves from criticizing. It's simply doing things that you should be doing. Helping when you should be helping. It's not that simple. It's not that difficult. And so that's the emphasis of All Saints' Day. It's a day of grieving, but we grieve not as those who have no hope. We rejoice as those people who know the resurrection. And then we understand that it's not to stop there. It's to recognize that we too are called on this day to be saints to each other. Amen. Sermon hymn, Jerusalem, my happy home. It's 628. Your red hymnal. Stand as you are able.